Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, Yellow Vest protesters have come under fire after video showed some protesters hurling anti-Jewish abuse toward a French philosopher over the weekend. Alex Morgan and our team in the Cube have this story. Alex.
Well, Tessa, let's start off by telling you about the man at the centre of this. This is Alain Finkielkraut. He is a French intellectual, a writer, called a man of letters by some. He has expressed very strong support of the state of Israel in the past, writing on these and many, many other matters, but also making controversial remarks in the media, particularly about the direction French society is going and the assimilation of migrants and immigrants into French society. That is who this intellectual figure is. And on the weekend, on Saturday, he was walking through Paris when he came into contact with elements of the Yellow Vest, the Gilets jaunes protest. You can see him here talking with them. Now, this is the incident here where he starts now to walk around the corner. In fact, a man puts his hand on Mr. Finkielkraut's arm. You can see him there, moving him round the corner. Now, what we are not showing you, what we are not going to be playing for you, is the audio that comes with this video. There is a lot of abuse being shouted. It's rude words as well as anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist language being shouted, as you can see, by quite a crowd of people in Gilets jaunes, in yellow vests, shouting at Mr. Finkielkraut. Now, there's one remark in particular that Mr. Finkielkraut said disturbed him. He said this in media interviews after this incident took place, and that is a remark shouted that France belongs to us. Mr. Finkielkraut saying, as a Jewish Frenchman, that kind of a remark scared him. That was a particular remark that stayed with him. Now, this incident, the abuse being hurled on the streets by people in yellow vests, drew condemnation from across the French political spectrum. Let me just bring up what the French Interior Minister had to say almost immediately after this, saying, to see scenes like this in Paris in 2019 is simply, effectively intolerable, is what the French Interior Minister said. He went on then to say in another tweet that, quoting some of the comments, some of the things that were being shouted, really offensive stuff, saying, we have now opened an investigation into this, saying that one individual has been identified as part of efforts to deal with this problem. But also the French President Emmanuel Macron condemning this verbal attack, these verbal attacks on Mr. Finkielkraut, and also suggestions there that if the police hadn't been there, from the Interior Minister, that things could have been potentially more concerning. But I think what is interesting is this suggestion here by Marine Le Pen, of course, a very different type of politician to Emmanuel Macron, but also condemning these attacks. But saying here it shows the yellow vests have been infiltrated by hard left elements. Now, whatever the truth to that claim, it is clear that the yellow vests are a very, very broad movement. Let's just bring you up another part of them. This is Thierry Paul Valette. This page here is his election page. He's running for the European Parliament. He has been very strong in his condemnation of anti-Semitic incidents in the past, and he considers himself a leading yellow vest. So, Tessa, you can see here divisions within this mass movement, especially between figures like Mr. Thierry Paul Valette here, incredibly strong in condemning anti-Semitism, and what we saw there in that video, straight-up abuse being hurled at a French intellectual.
All right, thank you for that, Alex and our team in the Cube. Now, the incident in Paris comes as other European countries struggle to address rising anti-Semitism. Now, over the weekend, there was a far-right march in the Bulgarian capital. The Sofia rally, paying homage to a pro-Nazi general, was denounced by rights groups and condemned by Jewish groups. Last week, new data released in France showed that anti-Semitic incidents rose by 74% last year. In Germany, there were more than 1,600 incidents reported, and an increase of 10%. Now, with me to discuss this is Raya Kalinova, CEO of the European Jewish Congress. We also have Robin Shklafani, director of the nonprofit Jewish Contribution to an Inclusive Europe. And still with me is our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. I'll get right to it. Raya, I'd like to ask you, how big is this problem of anti-Semitism? We saw the numbers. How big is it?
This problem cannot even say big. This is an enormous problem, and it is not a problem of the Jewish street. It is a problem of all civil society today. It is something that, it existed already, unfortunately, in history for I think that as long as we can go back to the beginning of the civilizations. But what happens today, it's really, if we can call it, the coming out.
Do you think it's getting worse?
Yes, of course, because it's, I cannot say it's worse. What can be worse that the Nazis enduring and the Holocaust? Of course, it's not the worst that Jews experienced, but it is now very different. No, because it takes absolutely unexpected forms.
So just to follow up on your point, Robin, Raya was saying that it's always been there. It hasn't really disappeared. So what is making it come up to the surface if it has always been there? Is it the environment, the political environment? Is that pushing this up to the surface?
Definitely a polarized political environment that we're experiencing is certainly putting more an us versus them kind of mentality in people. There's also the nature of globalization and the globalized communication. So the messaging is spreading from one country to another. And we find the far right and the far left, as they were saying in the report before, are connecting on common messages and on conspiracy theories in general. So this vulnerability to conspiracy thinking and anti-Semitism ends up being at the heart of it and the ultimate scapegoat, as we found throughout history, as Raya mentioned.
If I may add, I think that the detonator of all this was the internet, social media, media in general, because, unfortunately, the social media has become a very dangerous phenomenon. It is an incubator of hatred. And people who before would never dare to speak out, they found a platform.
Yeah. So do you think that's it? That people just speak out more now, but the sentiment has always been there?
Well, I'm always not easy blaming social media or media. Ultimately, it doesn't create how people feel. It does sometimes give them a platform to express those views. And you're entirely right that at certain pinch points in history, it's far too easy for Jewish people and anti-Semitism to rise. And that has certainly happened in the past. And I think, 10 years on after a financial crisis in Europe, we are still seeing that. I think what's concerning about this is just to see a breadth of it, from Bulgaria through to what we've seen in Germany, to France, even talk today about those Labour MPs who'd resigned in the UK, in part blaming anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. It's just the sheer scale of it. The question is, how do you solve it? And as much as you would say social media is potentially the ill of it, it could also be the solution because, the Holocaust happened. And I think, that was a long time ago now, particularly for younger generations. And social media can be a very good way to try and remind people of the horrors of the past to ensure that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and there's another point I'd like to bring up because in Alex's report, Marine Le Pen was blaming the far left for anti-Semitism. But then there are also, if we read a variety of newspapers, academics, even Jewish groups are saying, well, actually, it's related to the rise of Muslims in Europe. What do you see about this perspective that is that related? Of course, Muslim leaders have denounced this, saying this is such an unacceptable accusation, considering the rise in anti-Muslim sentiment as well.
I think that there can be no question that anti-Semitism exists within Muslim communities as it's existing also in the general society. And I think one of the things that we're seeing is that a lot of the anti-Muslim rhetoric, anti-refugee rhetoric is also anti-Semitic, right? So we're often targeted when we're doing work on anti-migrant hate speech or Islamophobic hate speech. We're being targeted because Jews are the cause of it all. And this goes back to the 1950s, the 1920s, where Jews have been blamed for putting at risk the white race and being too liberal in that sense. So I think that there's a lot of mixing that takes place in that. And certainly in France, where there's a great rise, you're having a very kind of solid, stable far-right party, but you also have a very strong far-left movement and a very large Muslim community, and as well the largest Jewish community in Europe. So it's a kind of, perfect storm there to see the rise of anti-Semitism.
So is this go ahead, Raya.
I do not think that Jewish leaders say this. Jewish leaders say that the radical Islam, radicalization of our youth, this is the great danger. Of course, the majority of Muslims are moderate. They are not all anti-Semites. Of course, it's stupid to say this. And some people say it's a new anti-Semitism. No. As even President of France, Emmanuel Macron, said that the new anti-Semitism, the new form of anti-Semitism is also what was called before anti-Zionism.
Sure.
Because, that's when I said media, I said the only thing that we would like to ask from the media to be very careful, because when they cover the conflicts that are far from Europe, in Israel...
You can't mix up all these topics. No, it's
but
true.
what you see,
Absolutely.
Immediately, here the Jews are attacked.
Yeah.
If something happens, they see the coverage and they say, OK, we go now and...
It's very interesting to be careful with terminology.
And it's really complex, and there's no doubt that obviously, and it's not just Muslims, but people have used obviously the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a rallying call for anti-Semitism.
Sure.
But also, what was interesting looking at that clip with the Yellow Vest protesters, when he said, what was it, that France is for us.
Yeah.
You know, that was not just aimed at Jewish people. That was aimed at anyone who clearly was not white